Hi, I'm Dale Thomas Vaughn. Welcome to a class I'm going to teach that I like to call From Invisible to Influential. And this is how to become seen, really how to be seen on TV, print, podcasts, and blogs. So I'm going to walk you through some really interesting pieces. You'll see some of that there on the left. You're going to walk away today with some stuff that can actually help you get booked, get your media going right away. Just so you know, I've taught this specific workshop for 2.5 years at the Los Angeles Small Business Administration to tons of entrepreneurs who are all over the map doing all kinds of interesting things. And the thing I hear a lot is I have this great big idea that could help so many people, right? Like I was like this too when I started my entrepreneurship endeavors. And I recognized that pretty soon, this big idea I had that I thought could affect millions of people kept getting stuck in this echo chamber of I only know a handful of people. I can only reach a handful of people. My circle of influence is not as big as my idea is. And that's when I started thinking, okay, how can I expand my circle of influence? And part of what I sort of studied in college and did in the corporate world for a long time for big brands and companies was I helped them get media. So I started using that skill set for myself. And lo and behold, I started getting a ton of media for myself. A couple of years ago, I had a good friend who is an entrepreneur as well ask me, how are you getting all these appearances? At that point, dozens of podcasts, media, like TV. I've been in magazines, I've been front page in newspapers, I've been in tons of blogs, reached millions of people. So my circle of influence had really grown. And I just realized I could teach this. I could help people who have a mission get seen more. So if you're like this, if you feel like you've got a great big idea, but your circle of influence doesn't match the idea yet, then you're in the right place. You're also in the right place if you feel like it's a little frustrating that you've been seeing people who are less qualified than you get more name brand recognition, right? Getting more opportunities to speak in the media. Maybe you hear them on the radio or you see them on TV and you think, I know more than them. I have done this longer than they have. Why are they getting the spotlight? I'm going to go through some of that today. You're in the right place. The second is if you're a doer who really needs processes and systems that work, this is not a hocus pocus training. This is not a magical thinking training. This is a systematic way to go about getting media. You've heard PR or publicity. Well, PR is public relations. So I'm going to teach you how to build relationships in the media. That's the whole idea of what I'm teaching, and I think it's the most effective way to go about gaining media for yourself. The third, if you're in the right place, you don't need to be famous per se, but you want to be trusted in your industry. I'm all about helping you build trust, which starts with authenticity and being really, really clear about where you actually provide value for people. You're also in the right place if you're a little weird. I find that the people who do the best with this kind of work are the ones who find that their story is just a little bit outside of the ordinary. If you feel like your story is a little bit outside of the ordinary, you're in the right place. Here's a story that's a little bit outside of the ordinary. This is a guy named Justin Chow, and he started a company that does French caramels, and he does this in Hollywood, in LA. And Justin came into my class in, I think, June. And within about a week of working with me, he pitched KTLA, which is one of the biggest news channels in the country. And they came out the next day to do a television segment for his shop on the morning news. And this segment, he says, the media coverage resulted in a 500% increase in monthly sales, new national wholesale customers, and another magazine feature article. And Justin has just kept going. He's been at Eater LA. He's been featured in multiple sources. The point of me telling you this is if you feel like you're more of a niche than French caramel, that's okay. But this is probably one of those small niches. When Justin came in, it was like, I'm not sure. I feel a little intimidated. Now, Justin's been on Oprah's Favorite Things. His caramels are outstanding. They're world-class confectionery, right? They're amazing. But how do you get media for something that the media doesn't understand? So learning how to talk in the language of the media is part of what we're going to cover today. I just want to show you what else is possible. This is another client of mine. If you've ever heard of the professional Cuddle List, Cuddle List as a training company that trains professional cuddlers. that's one of my clients. So when Adam came to me, they didn't know how to get in the media. It was like the media was thinking that they were this sort of weird sex story or something, training professional cuddlers. What is that about? So we worked together on refining his message and how the people in cities, but really all over the place, are missing out on the sort of intimate, non-sexual touch, the encounters of hugs or the cuddling or the sort of general being around people. And so we went that direction with the work. We talked about the science behind the cuddle hormone. We talked about the value of touch in our lives, and we tried to compare touch to food and drink and water and sleep, right? So you see how we shifted the story from this is a sort of weird sort of side story to, no, this is mainstream. This is something that's really important for everybody's life. And here you see them in the Washington Post. Now, Adam has been featured in hundreds of articles at this point, but this is just within a couple of weeks. He had over 60 articles in more than 20 countries, and he's been translated into multiple languages. Just one of those pieces, though, just one of those pieces reaches 132,000 coverage views. 132,000 people saw this piece. So if your sphere of influence is bigger than that, then you don't need media. But if it's smaller than that, then media might be a really good way for you to go about this. Here's another story of maybe you're still weirder than that story, right? Here's a couple who are a lesbian couple that got pregnant at the same time. Really interesting story, right? But what really came from this is my client, who started with me in, I think, February of this year, she immediately started pitching a story. Now, what she does is she's an acupuncturist who works with fertility. So you can see she has a book called Stick It To Me, Baby. She's great. And here she is on the front page of Yahoo News. Yahoo News, if you don't know, is the most trafficked media site in the world. So really, really high coverage views. 1.9 million estimated people saw this piece. Now that is a lot of coverage. So this is what's possible for publicity. This is what's possible when you get your story right, when you put it out there into the world in a way that the media can comprehend and use. So I'm going to show you all how this is done, and you're going to learn some stuff today that you've never seen before from any other publicist, I guarantee. I'm really breaking down the myths of publicity, so we'll share some of that as we go. A little bit more about who I am. So I've been an activist and a speaker in the gender equality movement for really my whole life, since I was about 15 or 16 years old. But I've been doing it in earnest as an entrepreneur for the past 7 or 8 years. And in the process of growing my brand, I've really used media and speaking and publishing as my tools to get myself out there. I've spoken recently at Stanford University. I've spoken at the Women in Tech International Summit. I host a conference called the Better Man Conference. I'm also part of the Good Men Project. I'm an editor at the Good Men Project. Now, if you don't know that brand, the Good Men Project is a top 100 blog. We reach 3 to 4 million people a month. That's like Oprah.com level, that's Politico.com level, that's LATimes.com level. And I'm an editor there, so what that means is I receive a lot of pitches from people outside of my kind of sphere of influence. So not only have I done a lot of pitching to media, not only have I done pitching on behalf of major clients, not only have I spoken at major clients, I've also received a lot of pitches as well. So I can give you an example of that as we go into this and give you kind of an idea of what an editor really is looking for. So I'll share more of my story, but I just want to share a little bit about why I'm teaching this. This is part of what I call the Experts Launchpad. Now, there are 3 different sort of ways to go with raising your expert profile. You've probably seen all of these, maybe you've even tried a couple of these. So the one I'm teaching today is Media for Your Mission. And this is specifically for mission-driven entrepreneurs who are out there trying to do something good in the world. I want to help you get seen in the media, right? I want to help you learn that skill set. I'm teaching skills here, teaching you how to fish. I'm not doing for you as much as helping you learn how to do. The second is the big idea book. If you have a book, if you've published a book, it helps you grow your expertise level, grow your influence. It helps you book speaking gigs and media. A book can be very helpful in growing your expert profile, and so does speaking. So if you're speaking from stage, that is a place of power. It's a place of privilege and opportunity. And I've used speaking to great effect to open relationships, create client bases. It's been a really big driver for my business. So I just want to share some of those. I teach a little piece of all of those at the Small Business Administration in Los Angeles. I teach this every month, but this is part of my programming. I'll give you kind of a quick example of how this works. So I've published 6 books of my own. They've all been bestsellers in their categories and a few other categories as well, including happiness and leadership and business. You'll see there the wine snobs are boring and beer snobs are boring. Those are some of my favorites because they're some of my sort of side pursuits. I'm a certified specialist of wine. And I'll share more about how this goes, but just kind of want to focus in on The Good Life Plan for Men. You see that over there on the right. That's one of the books I've written that's about my work with men and masculinities. So when I published this book, it got to #2 in business leadership on Amazon. I couldn't beat Tony Robbins that day. It's unfortunate that we launched in the similar time frame. So tough to beat him in one day, but really proud of being #2 in that category. That's a really competitive category. So what I did with this book is I then pitched myself to some media. And I'm going to show you all of the steps I did here, but I'm just going to kind of boil this down to a story. When I pitched myself to media, I got booked on the largest podcast in my space. It's called The Art of Charm. About 140,000 downloads per episode. How many of you would love to have 140,000 people listen to your voice for 20 to 40 minutes? So when I did this podcast, so the book is really what got me on the show. And I'll share another piece of how I got on the show with you a little bit later. And from this show, it was heard by a lot of people. A lot of people came to my website, signed up for my email list, became clients of mine. But I also used the appearance I had on The Art of Charm, which is a media appearance, to build my case as a TED speaker. So then I applied for a TEDx Talk. I got that TEDx Talk when I spoke on the TEDx stage, which you can go and look up. It's called How Great Men Think Alike. Play on how great minds think alike. And it's a really, I worked really hard on that speech. I think it's one of my favorite things I've ever done. It now precedes me when I walk into a room. You know, when people meet me, they've generally done a quick, cursory Google search, and this is what comes up. They see my TED Talk. So it raises my profile very quickly. From this, what's kind of cool is there was, I had a lot of other opportunities come from this after this TED stage. But one of the most interesting ones is I had a guy who contacted me on my website and said he had seen my TED Talk and he had checked out my episode on The Art of Charm, and he saw that I had a book and he wanted to invite me to be a speaker at a men's retreat in Bermuda. So they flew me out, paid me, and I spoke at a men's retreat in Bermuda about the concepts in my book. So you can see how you string together a book, media, and speaking, and you get these incredible opportunities. How many of you would like to get paid to travel to someplace like Bermuda and spend a week on a beautiful island and get paid? How many of you would like that? That sounds good, right? So the little things add up for me. I love the power of expertise, of putting your expertise out there. Here's a little bit more about who I am, just so you have an understanding of my background. I started out in PR in college and school. I was already doing masculinities work then. I was already speaking about how to engage men in ending sexual violence. So I was already using my tools around PR to get myself on shows like CNN and CBS. And in 2007, I did early career, I did a year work with Southwest Airlines around their communications. And then I spent some time as an intern in the House of Commons in the United Kingdom. That's in Parliament. So that was kind of cool, walking around under Big Ben and stuff. And then I spent a few years at Ticketmaster. So during that time, I was learning how to really do a good job of communication at the highest level, right? Southwest Airlines, House of Commons, Ticketmaster. These are mega powers, right? Mega seats of power. So in that process, I had kind of an interesting opportunity. With Ticketmaster, I helped build out their entire communications program from bottom to top because it was rolling out from under IAC. So during that time, we won a bunch of awards. I learned a ton about how to work with big brands like the NFL and, at the time, Miley Cyrus and Justin Timberlake and Michael Jackson's last tour and stuff like that. So it was really, really fascinating work. But one of the other things I did is I wrote the speeches because of my time writing speeches. I wrote the speeches for the executives. So Barry Diller was our chairman. And one day we were sitting around that little phone. You see, you've probably all seen on a table or sat in front of yourself that sort of looks like it's on the Death Star or something. And we're talking about, or he's talking. He's giving a speech, like a report to the employees every year, twice a year, and financial performance, and just addressing the employee groups. And this is around the time of the recession, so he's about to tell everybody that they're going to go through layoffs. We're going to go through layoffs. And so that means I have written the speech. I already know that. And he's about to blame the recession for all the layoffs. Now, I've also written the speech for the CFO, so I know that actually we're profitable, and we're projected to be profitable for many years. In fact, Ticketmaster was always profitable. So it was basically a lie. It was really not. I know it's common in the sort of corporate space to see people as numbers and bottom line. When you can clean house, you do. I understand that, I guess, but I looked around the room full of other old white men, and here I was, this young guy with a magic pen. I could write good speeches. I knew how to do good work, and I recognized that I was working for the wrong group. And that's when I remembered that actually the person I was writing speeches for was the person in real life who inspired the character, Mr. Burns. No kidding. I was writing speeches for Mr. Burns. And I realized, boy, I could take my talents and do a lot of other good with them than work for Mr. Burns. So I did. I spent some time building my own companies. I actually went to the Small Business Administration myself early on to understand how to structure a company and how to start the process of becoming an entrepreneur. So I started nextgent.com. We reached lots and lots of people, rolled that up into the Good Men Project. Since the beginning, I've been part of the Good Men Project. And now I run a consulting company called the Gender Leadership Group, and we have a conference called the Better Man Conference. And in that space, we're the first ones to ever do work that's about inclusion, gender inclusion, but talking specifically to men. How do you get men involved in that conversation? If men are the issue, then there is an opportunity as well to bring men on board. So it was only a few years ago that I started teaching media because people were asking me for it. And that's when I recognized there were so many good people who didn't want to be Mr. Burns. They wanted to be seen doing good work, like I was doing my good work. And I recognized that I could teach other people how to overcome the headlines of Mr. Burns, right? How to be bigger than the Mr. Burns stories. So that's really what I'm inspired to do with media. I help people who are doing good in the world get seen more. Let's go over some media myths and truths that you might be dealing with right now. The first is that media is hard to get. And it's okay if you've ever thought this, that media is hard to get. It looks very opaque from the outside. Publicists charge a lot of money, so it must be really, really hard to do. This is absolutely false. Good stories are actually in demand. Here are the facts. There are around 3 million blog posts written every single day. There are 3.3 billion podcast downloads in 2015, and 1 in 5 Americans is listening monthly. 7,000 magazines in the US, and the average American reads roughly 30 minutes per day. And 15,000 radio stations in the US with 240 plus million people listening to radio each week. And we know that TV is even bigger than all of that. The point in this is what you can, that can be overwhelming, or you can look at that and say, boy, there are a lot of stories going out today. And let me tell you something. At the Good Men Project, we reach 3 to 4 million people a month. The way that we do that is we have to stay up on the Google rankings. And in order to do that, we have to publish a lot of content. So we put about 30 to 35 brand new content pieces out every single day. We're just one blog, and we have mostly a volunteer staff. So what you're hearing is there's a whole lot of editors scrounging for good stories, dying for good stories to come to them, and they're missing these opportunities that you are not providing them when you don't pitch your story to them. So I want to teach you how to get in there. The second myth you hear a lot of, or I hear a lot of, is that you have to be perfect. You wait until your story is perfect, till your angle is right. You need to nail it. That's false. Perfect is boring. We want you to, I'm an editor, I want you to pitch me something that's authentic, that's real, that's great, but that's real, and that matches my audience. That's the most important part of this. I will help you make it right. I will help you perfect it. That's my job as the curator. The third is that you have to know someone. Now, this is true and false. The story is really what matters most here. But if your best friend has a podcast and your story matches that audience, yes, call your best friend and say, hey, can I be on your show? But if your best friend has a podcast and your story isn't great and it doesn't match their audience, your best friend will tell you, sorry, man, or sorry, lady, your idea does not fit my audience. Like, go somewhere else with it. So it's true and false. Relationships help. This is also true that the more you build relationships, the more you can call on those relationships. So let's say you become friends with the local TV station manager. That person's going to call you occasionally. They're going to kind of know that you're valuable as a resource. So relationships do matter. In the beginning, if you don't have any, the story is really what you need to build. So I'm going to help you with that. The fourth myth is that media isn't free. That is false. That's called advertising. You want to stay away from that. The important part of media is that it is free. There's no exchange of money, which means that third-party endorsement from somebody can be trusted, right? Because they're not getting anything from you except a good story. So when you're reading as an audience member, and you're watching or listening as an audience member, and the media is free, you know that the curator has made sure the story is good. So you're not wasting your time. The fifth is that only some media really works. This is true. Targeting your media is what matters. So if you're targeting yourself to the wrong kinds of media, or maybe you're targeting really big media and you're not quite to that level yet, credibility-wise, you'll waste your time. You'll spin a lot of your wheels. Now, I'm going to help you with how to target today. You're going to walk away with a really good idea of how to target yourself today. The sixth and final myth I hear a lot is that you can't be yourself in the media. That you need to be somebody else. You need to pretend to be some kind of personality. That is false. Media is about personality. The challenge is to know yourself. The challenge is to be fully authentic and present while on camera or radio or whatever. And so I'm going to help you capture that story. That's the hardest part of this media stuff, is trying to capture your own story. So I'm going to help you walk through that. The first step in my program that I call Media for Your Mission, which I think is the most important part of this process, is finding your newsworthy headline. And why is that? The reason your newsworthy headline matters so much is that when you pitch, it is going to be your elevator pitch. Your headline is really the thing that could hook or not an editor or a curator. So a newsworthy headline gets your emails open, it gets your phone calls taken, it gets your story moved forward. You're trying to create a relationship. The newsworthy headline is that opening of the door. If you don't have that door open, you're not going to be able to step through it. So I'm going to help you craft your headline today on this webinar. The first part of that is learning how to read your client's mind, right? Really understanding that your headline comes from your client. The second part of that is finding the story template that matches your audience, and that's really about making sure that you match the way that the story is presented. I'm going to show you how to do that. And the third is to speak the editor's language. If you don't understand an editor and where they're coming from and what they're looking for, then what happens is you pitch yourself as an ask rather than an offer. And I'm going to help you figure out that today. People who've used this system have been featured in all those media sites below and many, many more. So I'm going to show you all that has ever worked. All right, the first thing I need you to understand is that when you approach media like this, you're going to have problems. This is typically what people do, and it gets them into a lot of trouble. So you're a need-based entrepreneur, right? I need to drive revenue, so then I need people to see me, right? That's what my feeling is on this side here on the left. And so what do? You invest your money in a publicist to spread the word about your story or about your business. Now, at that point, you see the dotted lines change to solid because you lose the relationship at that point. You have no management of the relationship with the media if you hand your money over to a publicist. The publicist is going to haggle with you about the investment level, by the way. They're going to try to get the most they can, give you the least they can. You're going to try to give them the least you can and get the most you can. So you can see how there's actually, you're setting up a dynamic to not help each other. The media is going to kind of recognize that in a way, because the publicist is going to pitch only the level you pay for, right? So what you then do is you accidentally set up a system of need, and you attract media and you attract buyers who are needy. And so if you've ever heard this, boy, you guys cost a lot, or how little can I pay you to get your service, you might be in a need-based cycle with your buyers. So what I want you to do is take this great big idea you have, put it in the middle of the ecosystem. You're in the middle now, right in that sort of big spot. And I want you to think from left to right. Think about the audience first. Now, I've represented here on the left, there are a lot of different kinds of people who are thinking a lot of different kind of things. And maybe this is one person thinking all these things in one day, but twice a day they think about the thing that you actually know about. And where do they go? What is the trusted media sources they go for information about the things you know about? So let's say in this situation, you know about savings and you know about airplanes, you know about travel savings. Okay, so they go to trusted media, TV, blogs, magazines, podcasts, radio, for these are trusted sources of information. At the back end of those media sites are curators. We call them editors or producers or showrunners or whatever. But really what they are is curators for the audience. They are directly in conversation. They are back and forth with the audience. So at that point is the PR. Now, PR is really a method of relating, a method of creating a relationship. And if you come into the curator's world saying, hey, I noticed that you talk about travel savings. I know a lot about travel savings. I'd love to offer my opinion about something or a story about that. Do you think that would be helpful for you? Now, your curator in that situation says, yes, I'm trying to reach these kinds of people. You have stories I can trust. Great. They start to see you as a trusted and valuable expert. And that creates relationships. So then you can keep coming back. You could even set yourself up, imagine, with a series or a contributor section to a really important blog or podcast. Imagine you were just you were the expert in your space. That makes your business a trusted business. And that means any investment that any client makes in your business and in you is a trusted investment, because you've been stamped and verified by the curators of that industry. Now, if you start to see yourself like this, it changes the dynamic. It makes the relationship the important part, not the need. So I want you to build based on relationship, not on need. Okay, this is an important mindset shift for you. Now, the first step in actually doing this, I call this your target market avatar. You've probably done this for your marketing plan or your business plan, but if you haven't, you need to. This is a little bit different. What I want you to do is think through your main market, the person or people you love to serve, your ideal client. Of course, you want their age range. Of course, you want their key demographic data. I want to cover a couple of specific pieces here. One is the main fears, pains, and worries. What are the things that they are dealing with on a weekly, daily basis that you address, right? What is their fear, and how does your story tie to it? The second piece of this, and these typical thoughts, stories, and quotes, you can literally ask. You can ask your clients, what do you think about this aspect of your life? What do you worry the most about this? Tell me a story about finding airline savings that you've had. What do people tend to tell you who have worked with you, who love your work? What do they tell you about your experience? What do the testimonials all kind of sound like? What are they talking about? You want to get some of those thoughts, some of those stories and quotes, some of those fears, pains, and worries, because those are going to end up becoming pieces of your headline or pieces of your key messages. Now, at the top right, you'll see social media communication and medium. You need to know how people are sharing. How do people in your space share their stories? And this is important because if they don't share on social media, you're spending a ton of time and energy on social media, maybe you need to divert your time somewhere else. If these are people who really only share around the water cooler, then you're going to need to do something that helps them share around the water cooler. Final piece of this is the demographic data. Now, obviously, you need to know the money level, the kind of people you're reaching. Different people with different kinds of money read, watch, and listen to different kinds of media. So knowing that's important. Location, clearly important. But I'm going to have you break down the idea of where you reach geographically. I'm going to talk to you more about that in another slide. But for now, what is your ideal client? Where do they live? Do they live within a city limit? Do they live in a certain state? Do they live in a, do they speak a certain language, etc.? And at the bottom, you might be able to see there's a question mark, bottom right, because there's something demographically that's different about your group than any other group. And that group probably has a whole set of media for it. For instance, when I work with men, one of the things that I find is that they are typically very isolated. These are guys that don't gather a lot. So one of the things I have found is by extrapolating that backward, well, how am I going to reach people who don't gather in large numbers? I recognize that a lot of these guys who are isolated are listening to podcasts in their earbuds because it's an easy way to be inward, to be doing interesting things, listening and thinking and being, but they don't have to do it outwardly. So that's who I targeted first for my media. I went after a ton of podcasts. I got on a ton of podcasts that helped me get my first big round of clients and helped me grow my business. Knowing and understanding your market is going to make a big difference about your media. That's step one, knowing your client, reading your client's mind. I'm going to help you translate that in just a moment. The second part of this is knowing the template to submit in, the story template. Now, here's how you do that. You're going to think about your client, and you're going to try to imagine what is it that they actually watch, listen to, and read. Maybe you could even ask them, what are the sources of media that you actually get information from? And here I've got different buckets, 3 different buckets, visual, auditory, and print. And that's because people tend to learn in different ways. And so you might find that you really fit into the visual format, or you really fit into the print format, or maybe you love talking and you want more space, so auditory is going to fit for you. Knowing that there's a handful in each, right? What you really want to get to is 3 or 4 sources in each of these 3 buckets. And if you can do that, this is the beginning of a media list, as well as really, really good research about what is out there in your market. So for instance, in the men's space, there's tons of stuff. There's Esquire and GQ at the really high end, but there's also blogs like askmen.com and goodmenproject.com, right? There's tons of podcasts. There's A New Man, there's Man Alive, there's Knowledge for Men, tons of podcasts. And there's tons of visual opportunities as well. There's a lot of web TV shows like the Dr. Vibe Show, etc. When I put those into a format like this, that gives me a couple things. One is it lets me see the industry around me a bit. And 2 is it lets me have resource sites. Let me show you how to use that. What you do is you go to those sites. Now this slide has shifted. So if you've got 3 of each of these buckets, now you're going to go put a bullet out to the side of them. You're going to go to those websites of those shows, podcasts, and blogs and magazines. And you're going to look at headlines that sort of match your topic. So if your topic is about, well, we'll stay with airline savings, and you go to a travel site like National Geographic and you type in airline savings to their search bar, or you could even go to Google and type in airline savings National Geographic. There's going to be a handful or more of these articles. And what you're paying attention to here are the headlines. Headlines that are basically about your topic give you an idea of how to formulate your headline, how to literally put the words together to make your headline fit their format. Now, when you do that and you pitch an editor and it's in their sort of template for a headline, you're likely to get opened because the template fits. So what that says to an editor, from my perspective, when you pitch me something and it matches the headlines on my site, basic format, basic structure, then I go, okay, this person's read my site. They understand what my audience is looking for. They understand me. This is probably somebody who has done their work. So this is going to be the easiest possible way for me to get a good piece today in the magazine or in the blog, because I'm a person. And you got to remember, every editor, every curator, every podcast host, they're a person. and they've got a regular life and they're trying to get stuff done. A lot of them have jobs and they're trying to get it over with and go home to their family. So you want to think about it from that perspective. If you make the right template with a story that fits their audience, you know that because you've read their audience's mind, you've got a headline that's actually easy to open. I look at that and I go, great, that's a person that's probably going to be very quick I can groom them quickly if the story is good, right? So this is getting your emails opened. Getting your emails opened is step one, or getting your phone call picked up is step one, right? And then you can actually start to have a conversation. Now, let's talk about how to have that conversation, because once you get into a conversation with an editor, it can be like, oh boy, what do I do now? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can speak the editor's language. You want to understand what makes you newsworthy, okay? So there are 5 elements of newsworthiness. The first is timeliness. Timely stories are current, but also timely stories, we think about like extra, read all about it, breaking news, right? But if you look at the calendar, there are also upcoming holidays all the time that will tell you when a story will be relevant, right? So you can look like you're some kind of wizard, but the reality is you've pitched your love story well before February, or you've pitched your goal-setting story well before January, or you've pitched your money story well before tax day. So you want to think about your topic and what are the 5 most important times of year for your topic. I'm going to show you some examples of both timely, like super relevant in the headlines kind of stuff, and also calendars. So I'm going to show you that right now. Here's a client of mine who went through my training at the SBA. Let me see, I think this was in March of this year, and you can see they were in vegan news within a couple, 4 or 5 weeks. So they, Michael and Victoria, own a shop in Santa Monica that does frozen fruit. They call it Frozen Fruit Company, and it's sort of like ice cream, but without any dairy or sugar. So vegan-friendly ice treats, basically. So when the unicorn thing was going around with Starbucks, they decided, well, we can do a vegan-friendly unicorn smoothie type thing. We can do that. So they pitched it to Vegan News. Vegan News picked it up. Here they are on the front page of Vegan News Food, which I'm sure you can imagine is the most trafficked part of this site. It totally fits their audience. They understand exactly what their audience is looking for. Huge, huge, huge hit for them. So you can see how being timely is really important. If you have a quick story you could pitch, great. But if you're not like, oh, Johnny on the spot all the time, here's an opportunity as well. I pitched this to Maria Shriver. This is one of my pieces called 5 Reasons Why 6-Week Goals Are Better Than New Year's Resolutions. They cut off that second part, but that's fine. So what I did is I pitched this towards the end of January. I said, but at this point in the month, at this point in the year, 80-something% of New Year's resolutions have already been forgotten. So here's 5 reasons why 6-week goals are better than a year-long resolution. I can pitch a goal-setting story every year, and it'll get picked up. So you see how I use the calendar to my advantage there. So you want to get a little bit ahead of your calendar. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about this, and people in my class, I help you really groom this, but getting ahead of the schedule is important, right? Looking ahead for magazines as much as 3 to 6 months ahead, for newspapers, maybe a month or 2 ahead. For everything else, a month or so ahead is 6 weeks ahead is pretty good. You want to get ahead of schedule as much as possible. So that means if you need to craft the story, it might take you a month or a week, who knows how fast you are at this yet. You want to sort of schedule that out as well. Now, for a business person, that just starts to become part of your calendar. The more you understand this skill set, the better you get at it, and the more you can schedule it out. So this is one of the examples. The second step in newsworthy headline, the second sort of concept to understand about newsworthiness when you talk to an editor, is called significance. And this is obvious, right? It's how and whether a story affects an audience. So I'm going to give you a few examples of this, but this comes back to, what do your people think about on a daily basis? What are they worried about? What is their big fear every day, every week? So think about your audience. What are the 5 most important things they think about every day? If you address something that they think about on a daily basis, it'll make it feel like you're a wizard. It'll make it feel like when you show up in their favorite podcast talking about the thing that they're worrying about right now, they're going to listen. So understanding significance is really important. I'll give you a couple of examples. I am a alumni from a fraternity called SIG-Ep, Sigma Phi Epsilon, and I went to a big international conference on masculinities to talk about preventing sexual assault and how to bring fraternity men on board with that. So big international conference. So what I did is I pitched the journal or the magazine. It's a quarterly journal that comes out 4 times a year and goes to 200,000 alumni and parents from my fraternity. That's a pretty big hit, right? So as soon as I pitched them, I said, I'm a SIG-Ep, so I'm an alum. So I'm one of you. And I'm talking about a topic that's extremely significant to the fraternity right now, preventing sexual assault. And I'm doing it at a very significant conference, and this big international conference in front of all of our peers, right? This is a big, big deal. So guess what? They published me. They also sponsored my trip. They also flew me out. They helped me get introduced to a few professors that actually know a bunch about this that could also come and be part of a panel. So it became a really good relationship, and I'm still in relationship with those guys. They actually have me out to speak pretty frequently. So this is a significant topic to them. Here's another one. Lauren was in my class in, I think, December of last year. And she's a wedding planner, event planner. She's worked at big, big companies like Four Seasons and Beverly Hilton, et cetera. And she has this angle about how to attract millennial brides. Now, what she pitched was, what you don't know about millennial brides may be costing you business. So you can see how significant that would be to anybody at Special Events Magazine. Anybody reading that is going, costing me business. Oh, that's really important to me. That's super significant to my life. I am worried about my business every day. I'm also worried about how do I attract millennial brides, knowing that 92% of brides these days are millennials. So that's kind of a big deal. So she got picked up. She got actually picked up in 3 different major magazine sources in her space, in her industry, and is speaking at conferences now. She actually got booked as a multiple contributor, a series contributor at this magazine, Special Events. So a magazine and a blog, huge, huge hit for her, made her kind of a star in her space, right? So that's significant to the audience. The third element is proximity. Now, when you think about geographical proximity, obviously you think about where you live, or you think about where your business is. Now, that's a great way to start, but it's not the only place that you can do. So what I want you to think about is the people who are part of your audience have a physical body that they walk around in on a daily basis, and they go to certain physical locations that are similar no matter where they live, no matter what city they live in. And let me give you an example. So let's say you wanted to talk about airplane savings, right? How do you save money on airplanes? Well, if you talk about an airport, how to save money at the airport, right? How to get the best food at different airports, etc. The airport, just the idea of the airport, is a physical proximity, is a physical location that everybody goes to who is in your audience. I have a ton of experience in airports. I know a lot about airports. And I read about travel and how to understand how to get better at it. So you can see how that's a physical location that is significant. Now, you can also use your local papers. There's always more local papers than you think there are. You think that, like I live in Los Angeles, and everybody goes, yeah, LA Times, LA Weekly. Well, those are just the big ones. There's also the OC Weekly. There's the Pasadena Weekly. There's the Los Feliz Ledger. There's a Griffith Park paper, Friends of Griffith Park paper. There's all kinds of little papers and magazines and stuff that are localized all over this city. Now, that's true of every city. You can also think about the local hero concept. If you, let's say, for me, I grew up in this little town in Mansfield, Texas, and I now live in Los Angeles. Whenever I go back to Texas, I pitch local Texas papers, and I tell them I'm a Texan who moved away and is doing all this work, and I've come back to Texas. And guess what? They get all excited about that because I have a physical proximity to their story. I have a relationship to their story. So what you want to think about are, what are the 5 most important geographical locations in the lives of your audience? Maybe there's one big conference that everybody goes to in Las Vegas at certain times of year. And you could pitch all the Las Vegas papers around that time of year about your topic. right? You see what I'm saying? Think, when does your story revolve around a place? I'll give you some examples. This is when I was working with a company that does charter schools. They have a big charter school network for at-risk students. We had a school that was changing locations within Fresno. So I called up the Fresno Bee newsroom. Hi, I'm from the local school. I want to let you know that we're changing locations. I want to make sure that's in the paper, and so that nobody has any trouble coming to school. Well, Hannah Farfaro, you see the woman here who is tagged as the byline. She was very young, right out of school. She was super excited about the contact because it was really relevant to their location, really relevant to their space. So she published this, and it was actually a little bit of a longer article. It was super well read. We had no problems because our stuff was in the press. And guess what? A couple weeks later, and forevermore, Hannah called us every 2 weeks saying, hey, what's going on at the school? Can I publish anything in the paper this week? That relationship of proximity was important to her. Here's another example. I went to Austin to speak at this big conference called SHRM, Diversity and Inclusion, the Society of Human Resource Management, Diversity and Inclusion. Big conference. And what I did is I pitched all the Austin papers. I said, I'm going to be in Austin. I'm talking about this topic. You have a really great opportunity to talk about an interesting, significant topic. But the reason it's relevant is that I'm in Austin right now. So guess what? I got picked up. They interviewed somebody from an Austin-based organization, but then they came out to the event. They interviewed me. They put all this in the paper. This is just one of the ways you can get your story picked up if you have the story revolving around a place that's relevant, okay? So the fourth element of newsworthiness is prominence. Famous people get regular news coverage because they're a known quantity. They're already known. Readers and viewers are interested in celebrity because people are interesting who are famous, right? So the question for you is, can you think of 5 people who are super famous in your topic that your people think about every day? If you can work them into your headlines, this can make a big difference. If you can compare them, use them as kind of a case study, that will come in handy as well. I'll show you some examples. Here's a guy named L.C. Green, and he was in one of my first classes, like June 2013 or something like that, maybe 2015. I don't remember. It's been a while. But L.C., he must have been 2015 or 2016. So he does tax planning and financial management. Now I think that's really like kind of boring. I'm like, I don't know how to make this interesting. I said, so let's talk about your audience, and who do you love working with? And he said, well, I love working really with people of color who are retiring from government work, because the structure of that is really interesting and I'm super interested in it, and people seem to be confused by it. So I love helping people with that work. I said, well, do you know any person of color who's retiring from government work anytime soon? And he was like, oh my God, could I talk about the Obamas? Is that a thing I could do? I said, well, how similar is his plan to the people you work with? They're like, yeah, it's actually structured almost the same, just obviously more money at the top, but it's the same structure. I said, so what if you just talked about Barack Obama as a case? You said, how Barack Obama can have a happy retirement, and you talked about how to plan for retirement using him as a case study. And he was like, oh my God. So he used that, pitched that, got into a bunch of the newsletters in his space. Really, really powerful stuff. So that's one way to do it. Here's another one. A couple of my clients who use Trump in their headline, is Trump tearing your marriage apart? Now they do relationship counseling, relationship work. So what they wanted to talk about was the politically divided marriages going on in the US and how that is creating relationship stress. So they use Trump as kind of a way to talk about the politically divided marriages, which is fascinating, right? It's totally interesting. And guess what? BuzzFeed picked this up. So you can see how working people into your headline can make a big difference. Now you don't get to slander, libel, you don't get to make fun of people, but what you can do is talk about them in a way that enlightens your audience to their own story. Okay, so I will help you with that if we get to work together. The fifth and final element of newsworthiness is called human interest. Now, I just want to say real quick, you can combine all of the things I've just said, all of the 5 elements of newsworthiness. If you can combine a couple, that makes everything punchier. It makes everything bigger. So you can get by with just one, but if you can add some together, then you really have a potential hit on your hands. Human interest is basically everything that has to do with just an interesting human story. Love stories, transformation stories, the survival story, the lists about how to do something. These are interesting stories because they're about humans, anything with an emotional impact or appeal. So if you can't find, like if you're telling a story about your overcoming cancer, that's a human interest story. If you hear a story about surviving in the wilderness for 3 to 5 days or whatever, that's a human interest story. I'm just interested in that work. I'll give you some examples. So when I pitched my Running with the Bulls story to Huffington Post Masculinity, so nothing particularly significant about this, although people who read this, the guys who read this, are interested in talking about life and death, so it's sort of significant as a topic to them. Nothing proximity based. The HuffPost Masculinity, it's not really based in Spain or anything. There's nothing timely about this. I pitched this at a time off of the festival, so the festival's in July, and this was published in May. You could argue that there's a celebrity angle here, I suppose, just because the bull run is sort of famous worldwide. But really, the hook here is that it's an interesting human story. What is it about running with the bulls that men do it? Why? Why is that? So really fascinating. Got published, got a lot of play, got me booked on several podcasts to talk more about that story. Here's another one. So this is Me and My Lady, published in LA Weekly in the Couples edition, 2012, I think, 2013. And the story is, he runs a men's group, she runs a women's group, and it's bliss. Well, what does that mean? He runs a men's group, she runs a women's group. And I don't know those names, so there's nothing really going on here except for it's timely because it's about love, and it's a human interest story because it's about love, right? So if you can work a love story together about that time, that'll be good news. Here's another one. This is my client, the Cuddle List client, which I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again a little bit later, in the New York Times, right, in the fashion and style section, which is tough to get into. And the title is Pillow Talk with a Professional Cuddler. That's a human interest story. There's nothing about that is any of those other topics. It's just kind of interesting. I like pillow talk. I like cuddling. I don't really understand what you mean by professional, but I'm interested in that. So what does that mean exactly? It's an interesting story, and it's got a lot of pickup as well. And you can see how human interest works, right? It's about humans. So what I want you to understand about that whole process is that your headline needs to understand the audience, needs to match the template that place you're pitching supports already, and it needs to have 1 or 3 of those angles, right? That helps your headline be a really catchy headline to open those doors for you. Because I believe that once you start the relationship with an editor, you will see that they're regular people and they just want to help you come up with your best story, okay? So these are the next parts of the system. Now, again, I teach this over a 12-week course. When I work with clients, I can work for months and months at a time, helping them build out an entirely robust publicity system. You can learn a lot of this really, really quickly. But today, I've just covered the newsworthy headline piece because it's the way that you open the door. And a lot of people can kind of stumble forward from there. If you want to learn more, I teach more of this system through my course at Media for Your Mission. This course is taught online, virtually, right, but live. So every week we meet together. It's 3 times a month for 3 months. So you get to go through 1.5, really 2 campaigns with me. So you get to go through stumble through the first one with me. I'm going to help you edit and get your stuff correct. You're going to pitch yourself, and then you're going to get booked in that first wave. And then the second wave, right at the sort of tail end of that work with my class, you're ready to go out and start pitching yourself again. And so I've helped you kind of get your pitch ready for the second go around. So here's what we go through. The first part, obviously, your newsworthy headline is so important. The second part of that is your unique branded story. This is also called key messages. What is your story, basically? How do you say it? If you get to deliver, if you show up on the Today Show, what are you going to say? So your unique branded story are the key messages that basically build your brand. So I will help you really get those down. That's one of my, that's the magic sauce that I bring. I'm really, really good at helping people see their story really succinctly. The third is a targeted media list. Now, my media list, I will show you a little bit later, is really big because I've done this for a long time. But you get to start with 10 to 12, and you will probably get 2 or 3 bookings from that. Now, you need to really target that media list. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I show people how to do that in the class. The fourth is a relationship building pitch. So what does a pitch actually look like? What does the format look like in an email? What does the script sound like by phone? How do you actually start building relationships with your PR? So I show people exactly how to do that. I have templates and exercises, and I do practice with people on phone. I mean, I really want you to be comfortable making those calls. The fifth and final is a structured campaign timeline. So what does it look like to actually put a campaign together? What's the structure of that exactly? What's the timeline? Now, I can't teach all of this to you right now because it's a lot of content, right? But I want to show you just some pieces of each so that you have an understanding of where they go. So the second part of anything you do, once you, let's say you send a great headline to somebody, an idea, and they say, okay, send me your story. Now you're like, okay, what's my story? So here's where I come from this. I did my first podcast, you'll see there, called The Walkabout. I only pitched a headline. I didn't know exactly what I was doing yet with myself. This was way back. And I was on the Man School podcast, a great show. And I didn't really know what I was going to say. I just knew I was going to show up and kind of talk. And luckily, Caleb Bacon, who runs that podcast, is particularly good. Probably one of the best, maybe the best interviewer I've had since the beginning. Now, the reality is, I didn't know that at the time. I just sort of trusted him. If he had not been good, that would have been a real bomb. But I didn't really get anything from that podcast because I wasn't clear about my call to action. I wasn't clear about my story. I wasn't clear about how I'm impacting people, who I'm helping. I was just sort of talking. It was sort of ego driven. After that show, I actually asked, after the recording stopped, I actually asked Caleb, I said, hey, do you know anybody else in the podcast world who would be open to my story? And he said, yeah, and he helped me find other people to book myself onto, including The Art of Charm. Now, I vowed to myself, I'm not going to show up to another show again without knowing what I'm going to say, without understanding at least the formula I'm going to talk about, right? So this is what I came up with. This is what I have used for, actually I use this in the corporate space too, with the big CEOs and the big world leaders and all that stuff. But I hadn't really used it for myself. So this is what I use for myself. I think of it as getting my story straight. And this is, as you can see in the video or in the photo, this is the behind the scenes of the HuffPost Live shoot I did. So basically, when you get your story straight, now I help you do all this in my class, but you want to understand the heart of your story. What is the kernel of wisdom and truth in your story? You want to get down to that as close as you can. Then you want to know, why is it important? And the best way to show that the thing you're talking about is important is with some research. It can be one good statistic. It can be a handful of statistics, but one good research point or a quote, a case study, something that shows what you're talking about is important beyond just because you think it is. So for instance, when we were talking about Cuddle List and Adam Lippin and his concept of training people to do professional cuddling, one of the things we said was, did you know, we were talking in New York, did you know that 50% of people in New York live alone? And that really got people thinking, wow, half of our city lives alone. I said, yeah, it's the most populated city in the country, and most people live alone. That means we are walking around isolated. The difference between being touch isolated and food isolated is tricky because, and we started going into it, right? So you can see how one statistic made the story happen. So being really good about why is your story important. The next piece is, how does your story connect that study, that research, to an actionable takeaway? What can I do about the thing that's important, right? And a lot of times you want to spend some time there. Like, what is it you can do with your life to change your life to be better? And then the call to action. What is it you want people to do? Very specifically. Do you want them to come to your website? Do you want them to go watch your movie? Do you want them to back your Kickstarter? What is it you want them to do? You want to be really, really specific about this. Tell you a quick story. When I did this right, when I started getting this down, the next show I did, The Art of Charm, I got a good call to action down, and guess what? I got 3 or 4 clients at $3,500 a pop right away. So I made more than $10,000 in a week, which I'd never done before. And I did that because I was on a podcast and I had a good call to action. So this is part of that process. So you saw the HuffPost Live behind the scenes before. This is the front of the camera. Let me show you how to do a targeted media list real quick. So this is my media list. You can see these are the top 100 newspapers, radio, health and wellness, blogs before that, podcasts, morning news producers, a lot of different kinds of media out there, magazines, food and drink media contact list. So I have thousands and thousands of media contacts. Do you need that many media contacts right away? Now, anybody in my class gets access to this, and this list is always growing. Because everybody who comes into my class, I actually do research for you, and you show up to my class with more media. But I want to teach you how to do this yourself as well. How do you go out there and actually get media for yourself? Part of the ways you can do that is by realizing that these people are all wanting to be contacted. So most of these people have their contact information publicly available, right? It's funny how this kind of boils down to, are you willing to ask? So go out there and look for the people you want to find and go and ask, can I contact you? Or go look on their Twitter. A lot of people who are in the media have their email address on their Twitter account. So go to their Twitter account, follow them, and start to contact them that way. The fourth part of this is, how do you build an actual pitch? What does that actually look like? And again, I want you to focus on building a relationship more than getting something. Remember, go back to, you're in the middle of an ecosystem. You're not a need-based entrepreneur. So when I did this, basically I built a couple of different templates and exercises. One was a pitch by phone, one was a pitch by email. These are all in my courses, which I'm happy to share with you. I want you to succeed, so I give you exactly what you need to say word for word, but more or less, you're opening up a conversation. You're creating a relationship, starting with your headline. So if you walk away today with a kick-ass headline and you pitch that to somebody in the email, the email subject line will have your header in it or your headline in it, that will get your email open. But then what is in the email? You don't want to overwhelm them. You want it to be really simple and clear and concise, right? So you want to make sure you get that right. Now, I give those to you. I help you actually, before you ever pitch, people in my class, before you ever pitch, you actually pitch me so that I can actually look at your pitch, make sure that it's clear, make sure it's clean, and send it back to you and say, yes, okay, it's approved, right? So I'm really making sure that your pitches look good. The final piece of this is really understanding this is a structured timeline you need to set up for yourself. Is this something you can do in 48 hours? I guess so. But what you want to really start to think about is the long cumulative effect of media on your business. This is the Cuddle List, and this is kind of his timeline, so I want to show you some of this. You can see in the bottom left, there's a collection of 2 dots, and there's a middle set of 2 dots, and there's a right set of 2 dots. These are basically in conjunction. So this is 3 campaign cycles, basically. So in the bottom left, you'll see we started out with the Good Men Project, which I'm associated with, so I made sure that he went through different channels, but I helped him sort of go through the process of pitching at a fairly safe place, right? So we got a book there and a couple of other little blogs and also a little podcast. This is a little podcast in Australia, only like 2,000, maybe 3,000 people listen to it, but it was a great show. And what that does is that you get started, right? You get started where you can. You get started where your story fits. At the higher levels, at Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, New York Times, they need to see that you're credible before they will publish you. This is why celebrities get published more often, because they're already credible. So here's what happens. When you get published in some places like this, you can then go to the second level of pitching and the third level of pitching after that. So with the little podcast in hand, a little recording, we pitched the next level up on radio and podcasts, and we got Jenny McCarthy's show, Dirty, Sexy, Funny. It's a great show about the Cuddle List company. Really, really good fit, like 250,000 downloads, really, really, really good show. So then the next time we pitched to radio, it was a really quick and easy hit to get Howard Stern. So we went from a very small podcast to Howard Stern in about 2 or 3 months. So the first, imagine your first campaign is going to be a 6 or 6 or 8 week process, just from you stumbling through getting your pitch right and getting your story straight and which angle do you want to choose and who do you want to pitch and really getting that down. It's exercising a muscle you've probably never exercised before. The second time you do a campaign, it's like half the time because you've got your story pretty much right. You're maybe tweaking it, but you're not reinventing the wheel. So if the first time took you 2 months, this second time might only take you 3 or 4 weeks. And then the third time, you've really got it down at that point, and it may only take you a couple of weeks. So imagine you get to the point where you're pitching every couple of weeks if you get this good. Now, Cuddle List, Adam, has taken everything I taught him and continues to pitch himself every month. And he continues to get media every month. He's been in hundreds of media sites because he's taken what I've taught him to heart, right? So when we took the blog post of the Good Men Project, we then pitched up to the next level of our print sources, and we got the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, we got Glamour and Cosmopolitan and UK Daily Mail and the New York Times, and more from there. GQ, Esquire, Playboy Magazine, all kinds talked about us. So you get the idea here, right? I want you to start to think about what's the cumulative effect of my media? Where do I want to end up, and where can I start? So this was great, right? You've probably learned some stuff. I hope that you are taking pieces of this away and you're already feeling invigorated. I want you to feel like you can take even more with you, so I want to give you more. This is what I would do in live format. I would actually have you sign up to spend some time with me in a free media strategy session. That's typically a $500 value. And I'm also going to give you access to my slides and a couple of other things. So instead of being able to fill out a physical form because we're not standing right in front of each other, I'm going to put a link below this, and I want you to, or you can come to my website, and I want you to sign up for your complimentary strategy session there. That is a really great way to just find out your next steps together. I can help you really determine what is your headline, right? Run your headline by me. Let's work on it together. Again, I have a whole other business that I'm running. This is part of my give. This is part of my offering. This is a business. I do charge money for it, but it's important for me to make sure I'm helping people who are doing good in the world. I'm going to make this accessible for you. Instead of spending the tens of thousands of dollars you'll spend on a publicist to get probably less than you'll get from doing this work. I'm also going to give you, if you sign up on my email list, I'm going to send you my one-pager, what it looks like when I actually submit a one-pager out to the world to get booked. Now, I actually do use these instead of a press release. This is what my pitch kind of looks like now. And I have used this exact piece to get booked in multiple sources just recently. I'm also inviting you, if you get to this before October 21st, I host a live event called Attract High Value Publicity, and I do what I call Media Pitch Idol, where people actually get to come to the show, come to my workshop. It's a full day workshop, 10 to 6, and what you do is you craft your headline and craft your pitch. It's like a crash course, and at the end of that day, you actually pitch yourself to a panel of judges, a panel of people who are actual editors, actual producers, actual showrunners, and they give you feedback on how to improve your pitch, how to make your pitch bookable, right? I'm really excited about that. I think it's gonna be super fun. And if you miss this, if you see this video after October 21st, we will do this again. So stay in touch with me, okay? And I want to be really clear when you sign up to speak with me, my main objective. My main objective is to help people have a really, really good mission-driven business get seen. Now, if your mission is I'm helping people, I don't know, access their best selves in some way, right? If that's through style, or that's through traveling more, that's through writing, or whatever that is, if you have a heart for what you do, I want to help you. That's my main objective. And I just, I want to sort of leave you with be authentic and be clear and be you. That's the most important part of this whole thing. It's not really about being a better aspect of you. It's really just about being you at your best. Now, I'll tell you one final story. So this is a guy named Jeffrey Hoffman. He was the founder of Priceline. I met him at a conference several years ago, an entrepreneur conference, a couple hundred people in the room. And he's talking about, all of his billion-dollar endeavors and all the stuff he does. And he's super fascinating as a person. at the end of a show, he puts his email address up on the screen for all these entrepreneurs to see. He says, if you have any ideas, go ahead and send them my way. Go ahead and pitch them. And I went up to him afterward. Here you are. Here you see me with my fun hat on. And I shook his hand and I said, Mr. Hoffman, I can't believe you put your email address up there like that. Like, wow, I can't believe you're going to get so many emails. How do you deal with all that? And he said, oh, no, nobody's going to email me. That just like maybe, of course, I emailed him. So I knew that. I emailed him right away and we became, sort of friends. And so we're connected now. So I just want to share my email address in the same way. If you have ideas, you have thoughts, you want to move forward, but you're not sure where you are, if you're stuck, if your business is great and you know you deserve headlines, but you're having a hard time getting out there, I want you to contact me, Dale@dalethomasvaughn.com. And so I just want to leave you with that. I think the biggest thing about this work is recognizing that your story is big enough. But you just need to ask. You just need to get out there. Okay, I'm Dale Thomas Vaughn. I look forward to seeing you and hearing more from you. Sign up below. Come to the events that you can. Get excited about this work. I really love helping people just like you. Thank you.